It was a quiet Thursday afternoon on an industrial estate in the West Midlands, the kind of place where grey corrugated metal sheds blend into the grey English sky. To the passing motorist, nothing looked out of place. A heavy goods vehicle was parked up, its engine cooling, while men in high-vis jackets moved with purpose around the cargo. But watching from a distance, hidden in unmarked cars and monitoring live video feeds, were officers from the National Crime Agency. They weren't interested in the legitimate logistics of the haulage industry. They were waiting for a specific moment, a specific transfer. For months, they had been tracking a ghost, a supply line that was flooding the northeast of England with high-purity cocaine, yet seemed to vanish into thin air whenever they got close. The police knew the drugs were moving, they knew the money was flowing, but they couldn't find the product. Until today, as the rear doors of the van swung open, the officers didn't see bags of white powder or stacks of cash. They saw rusty, battered industrial gas canisters, the kind you would find on a building site or in a welding shop. It was the perfect disguise. But inside those steel shells wasn't gas. It was the lifeblood of an empire worth £68 million. This is the story of a gang that thought they had engineered the perfect crime. A group of men who believed they were smarter than the system, and the single tiny electronic mistake that brought their fortress crashing down. To understand the scale of this operation, you have to look away from the glittering skyscrapers of London and turn your eyes north. Newcastle, Gateshead, the northeast of England. It is a region with a proud industrial history, but in the underworld it is a marketplace with an insatiable appetite. For years, the drug trade here was fragmented, run by street dealers and mid-level thugs fighting over scraps. But nature abhors a vacuum, and in the chaotic economy of organized crime, chaos is an opportunity for a man with a plan. That man was David Jeavons. He wasn't satisfied with street corners. He didn't want to be a dealer, he wanted to be a logistics magnate. He understood that the real money wasn't in the selling, it was in the transport. If you could move the product safely from the ports of Europe to the streets of Tyneside without interception, you effectively printed your own money. Jeavons and his associates were not your typical reckless gangsters flashing cash on Instagram. They operated with corporate precision. They knew that the police were looking for fast cars, hidden compartments in dashboards, and couriers nervously speeding down the M1. So, they decided to hide their product in plain sight. They built a supply chain that looked, for all intents and purposes, completely boring. They used a fleet of unsuspecting legitimate vehicles, and a cover story that held up to casual scrutiny. But the genius of their operation lay in the packaging. They acquired industrial gas canisters, the heavy, cumbersome metal cylinders used for welding and construction. These weren't just props. They were custom-engineered safes. The bottoms of the canisters were cut open, the insides hollowed out, and then resealed with such professional craftsmanship that even a visual inspection would reveal nothing. Inside each cylinder, they could pack kilos of cocaine, sealed tight, airtight, and invisible. The route was established. The drugs would come in from Europe, landing in the southern ports of the UK, and then be transported north. It was a pipeline of pure profit. For a long time, it worked perfectly. The gang moved tens of millions of pounds worth of Class A drugs right under the noses of the authorities. They were disciplined. They used EncroChat, the encrypted communication network that criminals across Europe believed was unbreakable. On their specialized handsets, they didn't speak in codes. They spoke openly about weights, profits, and logistics, confident that the police were deaf to their conversations. They felt untouchable. They believed they had removed the human error from the equation. But they forgot one thing. In the world of high-stakes surveillance, you only have to be unlucky once. The National Crime Agency had been gathering intelligence on drug supply lines moving north. They noticed patterns of vehicles making trips that didn't quite make sense for their declared business. A network of individuals who seemed to have too much money and too little legitimate work. The investigators began a game of cat and mouse, but the mice were invisible. They needed a lead. They needed to know exactly where the drugs were. The breakthrough didn't come from a snitch or a confession. It came from technology. The police managed to identify a vehicle suspect of being involved in the transport leg of the operation, in a daring covert operation. While the vehicle was parked and unattended, officers planted a listening device and a tracker. This single tracker became the silent witness to the conspiracy. It wasn't just a dot on a map, it was the thread that would unravel the entire sweater. The tracker showed the vehicle making specific stops, lingering in locations that had no connection to legitimate trade. It led the police to the West Midlands, to a specific yard where the exchange was happening. The surveillance teams watched. They saw the gas canisters being moved. It was odd. Why would a vehicle transporting general goods be so careful with old, rusty gas cylinders? Why were the same cylinders being moved back and forth? The suspicion grew into a hypothesis, and the hypothesis grew into a plan of action. Then came the second blow, the one that the gang never saw coming. In 2020, French and Dutch authorities cracked the EncroChat network. Suddenly, the National Crime Agency wasn't just guessing. They were reading the script. They had access to the messages sent between Jeavons and his associates. They could see photos of the cocaine blocks, stamped with brand logos like Cali and Coca-Cola. They could read the boastful texts about the purity of the product and the massive profits they were generating. The level of detail was staggering. The gang had documented their own crimes in high definition, believing the encryption was a fortress. It turned out to be a glass house. The messages revealed the sheer scale of the operation. This wasn't a few kilos here and there. Between roughly 2020 and the day of the raid, the group had supplied hundreds of kilos of cocaine. The street value was estimated at over £68 million. They were flooding the northeast, fueling addiction, violence and misery across the region, all while they sat back and counted the proceeds. The EncroChat data, combined with the physical surveillance from the tracker, gave the NCA everything they needed. They knew who was involved, they knew where the stash was, and most importantly, they knew when the next shipment was moving. The trap was set. On that grey afternoon in the West Midlands, the police moved in. It was a coordinated strike. At the same time, raids were executed across the northeast. Doors were smashed in, suspects were dragged from their beds, and the empire of gas canisters was dismantled in a matter of hours. When the officers cut open the canisters seized in the van, they found exactly what they expected: block after block of high-purity cocaine. The intricate welding work that the gang was so proud of had been peeled back to reveal the poison inside. David Jeavons, the mastermind, the man who thought he could outsmart the NCA, was in custody. His associates, the couriers, the warehousemen, they were all rounded up. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The physical seizure of the drugs linked them to the crime. But the EncroChat messages provided the intent, the conspiracy and the hierarchy. There was no comment interview that could explain away the photos of cocaine sent from their own encrypted phones. There was no alibi that could contradict the GPS data from the tracker that placed them at the scene of the crime. The legal proceedings were a formality. The weight of the evidence crushed any hope of a defense. In court, the sheer professionalism of the gang was used against them. The judge noted the sophistication of the concealment method, the use of encrypted phones, and the cross-country logistics as aggravating factors. This wasn't a crime of desperation. It was a cold, calculated business enterprise. David Jeavons and his gang were handed lengthy prison sentences, totaling decades behind bars. The £68 million empire had evaporated, leaving them with nothing but time to reflect on the one mistake, the one tracker, and the false sense of security that led to their ruin. The impact of dismantling this gang was felt immediately on the streets of Newcastle and Gateshead. A major supply line had been severed. While it is true that in the drug game others will always step in to fill the void, the removal of such a sophisticated network disrupted the flow of class A drugs significantly. It sent a message to the underworld: no matter how clever your hiding spot, no matter how encrypted your phone, and no matter how invincible you feel, you are being watched. The story of the gas canister gang is a testament to the hubris of organized crime. They believed that because they couldn't see the police couldn't see them. They put their faith in steel cylinders and encrypted servers, forgetting that the most powerful tool in law enforcement is patience. They built a fortress of silence, but they didn't realize that the walls had ears, and the van had a tracker. In the end, they were just another group of men in a grey shed, waiting for a shipment that would never be sold, destined for a cell instead of a mansion. The game is always the same. You can win 1,000 times, but you only have to lose once. And the house always wins.